This is our first official meeting of the fall semester. And if you are new here, my name is Savannah Sicarella, and I am the president of the University of Georgia's chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists and Online News Association, which is a mouthful. And so today we are hosting a panel on the state of the news industry amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we have with us Ken Foskett, the senior editor of investigations and the internship coordinator at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Caitlyn Stroh-Page, the executive editor of the Athens Banner-Herald. And so I want to start with you, Caitlyn. We were just talking about this, but you assumed your role as executive editor right before the pandemic took flight. And so how did the Banner-Herald newsroom shift during this time, and what was it like assuming a role during this time of craziness?
Yeah, I think we're pretty much like every other newsroom in that we pretty quickly realized that we were going to have a lot more people working from home, and we were going to be having to adapt to the work from home lifestyle. So I don't think we were super unique in that way. But we were unique in the fact that I had just taken over as editor here, and I think that in a super small newsroom especially, but anywhere when you have someone who's new as leadership, it definitely it's weird when you can't be person to person, face to face, kind of learning names and learning faces and learning beats and that sort of thing. I know my first few weeks, whenever I had a news tip, I kind of just sent a spray email to the newsroom. I was like, I'm not sure whose beat this falls on, but just take it, someone. And so, we had to adjust to a lot of things in a really short amount of time. We have a pretty large space for our staff size right now. And so we have a few people who stayed going into the newsroom day to day, just because we can social distance really effectively in our newsroom, given our space and given our staffing. And, if people were, had hiccups or roadblocks at the house, they were able to still do that. So we were able to still be sort of those essential employees that were able to go in the office. But yeah, so we didn't have anything too abnormal outside of the transition. I think that every newsroom probably experienced a very similar thing. But yeah, and then for myself personally, taking over a job right at the beginning of the pandemic, we had furloughs in Gannett, and I will openly say that I took this job, and after the number of furloughs I've taken, I've effectively taken a pay cut for a heck of a lot more stress. So if you don't love journalism, then I don't recommend escalating your title, because it seems like things like this always pop up. But yeah, it was tricky to navigate things like furloughs, and our ad revenues really struggled in the beginning. I think like a lot of people, and having to figure out how much do we give away for free? How much is a public service, and how much do we put in front of the paywall, and how much are we willing to lose on the digital subscription side? And so there's a lot of business decisions right in the beginning. So it was a really tricky time. We were really, really fortunate at the Banner-Herald that we saw a lot of really big community support in the beginning, and people were still paying for journalism when I think a lot of other things were being put on the back burner, and when people were having to prioritize when money was tight, we really saw a big uptick in subscribers. So I feel very fortunate in that way.
Mm-hmm. And Ken, I want to throw that question to you. We were just talking about how people at the AJC are not really in the office anymore, but how did the AJC's operations shift during the early days of the pandemic?
So we were also work from home pretty early compared to a lot of other businesses. I think I was trying to remember exactly. I think it was March 11th or March 13th that we went out. We were already, though, certain by mid-February that we were probably going to have to evacuate our offices at some point, and in fact started having planning meetings on how it was going to work and how we were going to communicate with one another, and what special assignments people might have, shifting responsibilities in order to cover the pandemic once it hit, because it was clear that it was going to hit Georgia just like it had hit Washington State and New York, and that we were going to have to get ready for that, and that included, having to work remotely. And so, it was for me, and I think pretty much everybody in the newsroom, we were really kind of startled at how seamlessly we continued working and continued publishing a 24/7 website and continued publishing a newspaper every day, with very, very little static. And part of that is, even though, I mean, we're a little bit bigger than the Banner-Herald, we're still a pretty small newsroom. All newsrooms have gotten small. And so I think we benefited from the fact that pretty much everyone is on a first name basis with everyone in the newsroom. I mean, you know what people do and you've worked with them, and that always makes it really easy when you're having then to work remotely as opposed to in person. And the things that people have complained about, or did complain about, as we got into it, and still complain about, is the fact that you don't have the kind of more random encounters with your colleagues in the newsroom, and the kinds of conversations that often lead to a good story idea, or something new, and then also just the collegiality that you get in a newsroom, which I know probably a lot of your members have not had that experience yet, but it is one of the great things about working in the business. It's there's a lot of humor, and you're working with very smart people, and so the newsroom itself is just a fun place to work. And I know that all of us, including myself, we've really lamented that we don't have that. But on the flip side, everybody has really risen to the occasion, and people are working a lot harder. You know, um, as much as I hated my 45-minute commute to Dunwoody, from my home in Decatur, in the morning it was still a break. I listened to, NPR and podcasts, and, on the way home did the same thing, as a way to kind of decompress after the day was over. And now, my day starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it just goes right, right through. So we're all working harder than we were before, but it's also for a good reason. We're in the midst of an event that hasn't taken place in 100 years, and it's important to keep doing what we do to keep people informed about what's going on.
And I did want to ask, now we're kind of not far removed, but partially removed from very COVID heavy stories being at the forefront of the newsroom all the time. But in the earlier days of the pandemic, I think March or April, did you find, either Caitlyn or Ken, did you find that there was difficulty in figuring out what stories truly mattered, that were less COVID related?
Ken, I'll let you go first if you have thoughts.
Yeah. I will say I know that, and even through to today, there are certain things that we've probably covered less than we would have pre-pandemic, and it was more the case that in the early phases of the pandemic, everybody was doing pandemic COVID coverage, or at least it felt that way. And now, several months into it, people have, or some of the beats have moved back into some more of their traditional coverage. But it's still the case that a strong COVID story is guaranteed for page one in the paper. So that's still a very high priority, and and readers really want to keep knowing about it.
Yeah, I agree with that the strong COVID stories are still really important. And I think in the beginning, we didn't necessarily have the luck of having too many people to have to dissect and decide what we could do. We have, I mean, at the Banner-Herald, we have two full-time news reporters, and that's it. So
Yeah.
we pretty much maxed them out with COVID stories and things we didn't cover. It was because we physically didn't have time to get to it. But I will say that we did see, after probably the first 2 to 3 weeks, when breaking news and major moments were kind of coming down a little bit, I think we all sort of went into that utilitarian journalism mode, and we're trying to help connect people to things they needed and wanted. And then we really started seeing people wanting an escape and wanting something else to focus on. I mean, I think if you paid attention to this at all, when NASCAR picked up and did their video game series for a little bit, it was because, and people latched onto it because it was just something that wasn't COVID coverage. It wasn't talking about COVID constantly. And so we did see where people were interested in things that just didn't have anything to do with the pandemic at that time, and highlighting kind of maybe those little moments of joy that still existed in the pandemic were important to readers. And I think people did appreciate that kind of the breath of fresh air in between the accountability and the service journalism and all of the other things that are so important. But we did see a really big need for that and a big readership for that. And Ken, I think you'll probably more than anyone, you'll appreciate this, but I mean, we didn't have much time after the pandemic hit, and we had elections and we've had protests and we've had every major news cycle you can hit in about a 6-month stretch. And so we shifted so quickly from being all hands on deck with COVID coverage. And then it was all of a sudden it was social justice and it's been election. So, I think if you work in the red and black, if you work in a student newspaper, if you work in a newsroom, that like this year we just haven't had time to really digest too much and say, this isn't really worth covering. Everything's worth covering, it feels like right now. And
no, it's true. This is the most insane news cycle that I've ever experienced.
Yeah, it's a great time to take your first executive editor job.
Yeah.
Caitlyn, you were talking about this at the beginning of our call about the paywall that the Banner-Herald has. And so within the next few years, once hopefully COVID-19 has been squashed or died down at least, do you think that paywalled websites will be the future of all online journalism? Or if there's another business model that you are looking toward or have hope for?
I hope so. I am a major advocate of digital subscriptions, and I'm a big advocate of paying for journalism online. I think that most journalists in the field would agree that one of the biggest mistakes we collectively as an industry have made was giving away our work for free online. And now we're having to retrain readers that is the product you paid for so long. And we accidentally gave it away for a long time. And we spend so much time taking this weird dissociation people have with the internet that they pay their power bill for, or Facebook that they pay their phone bill for. And they think that means they get access to everything for free after that. And we're having to teach people how to be literate news consumers. And I think that we did a lot of damage to the industry as a whole on our own. Now, granted, Facebook didn't help us out at all at any point. We've had a lot of other problems that have really damaged the news industry, but I am a huge advocate of the paywall. I think that there's journalism that is worth paying for. I think that there are things that we should give away for free. I think that at times we are a public service. I think that we should think of ourselves as a nonprofit at times, but we are very much a for-profit industry. And I say this all the time that, we can't do journalism if we go out of business. And so you have to make sure that you keep a balance, a good balance sheet at the end of the day. So I'm a huge advocate of digital subscriptions and paying for your journalism. And I will fight that tooth and nail as long as I can. So yes, I do believe in the paywall, and I do believe that that's going to be very important to our success. I could go on a long tangent that I also think that grant-funded journalism is going to be it's currently a big part of our business model, but I think that is going to be even bigger as we keep moving forward. I think grants are going to become a very large part of local news and news media, but that's a lot more delicate and interesting of a conversation to get into.
And Ken, the AJC does not have a paywall. Do you have a similar position or any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, so we do not currently have a paywall, but newsflash, in a week or 10 days, we're going to have one. It's about to go live. And we just switched our CMSs over the summer, our content management systems. So the old paywall didn't work with the new one, and so there have been a lot of sort of technical issues to try to work through to get it back functioning. But for essentially the whole pandemic, we've not had a paywall. But we also think it's a very important part of our future. We think the digital subscriptions are an incredibly important part of our future. And as Caitlyn was saying, we also feel that some kinds of things ought to be free and always free. If we had the paywall during the midst of the pandemic, I know that all of our pandemic coverage would have been, designated outside of the paywall. And going forward, when we have, big news stories like this that, the public really needs to have access to, we will put those stories outside the paywall. But I think, that is the way, it is the way that the industry is moving. We could devote a whole lot of time, talking about this, but at one point there was a lot of hope for digital advertising revenue. That's pretty much, I mean, there will be some, but it's just never going to provide the kind of revenues that you need to sustain a news operation.
Here's the big bad question, but what do you envision newsrooms to look like once this is all said and done? Changes that you think will stick. We can start with you, Ken.
Yeah. So I think there's going to be continued a continued and aggressive pressure on most newsrooms in the United States financially. And that is going to have a consequence of making those newsrooms even smaller, and in some cases disappear. We've already seen that pretty dramatically in many parts of the country, and the whole phenomenon of news deserts, because there are not publications that can serve audiences. And and even right here in Georgia, there are places where that's very, very true. That's going to continue to be the case for many newsrooms. The ones that are going to do maybe a little bit better are, for whatever reason, those that have strong financial backing that can carry them. And so I can speak, just for the AJC, which is owned by Cox Enterprises, and more particularly the Cox family, which was, their wealth was founded on newspapers and on media, and they really take the commitment to journalism and to the AJC very, very, very seriously, and are very comfortable to keep us going, at a level where we can cover the news and serve our readers while losing money. And I'm not, I'm not going to pretend we are not making money now. And so, we're extremely grateful that we're part of a company and part of a, a family company that, that believes in us and wants to keep supporting us. But, we're probably, we're a minority out there when it comes to that kind of, financial backing. You probably could put the Washington Post and, and Jeff Bezos's fortune in the same category, and some others, but we're still going to be in a really difficult period for newsrooms, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that this has hidden any of the issues that newsrooms face, and it's definitely exacerbated it in some areas. And I think that one of the reasons I push digital subscription so much, both internally and externally, is that that is something that the newsroom can very much control, and that's something that we very much can. We have impact, and we have persuasion over. Is it kind of the way to say it? Is, you know, I have a number. I know how much money it costs to keep my journalists' salaries going, and I know how much it costs to keep travel, and I know how much money we make off a digital subscription. So I can do a really quick math to see how many digital subscriptions I need to fund my newsroom. Now, will we be able to stay in our building? Maybe not. We might have to all work from home, but I know how much it costs to keep good journalism on our website and to keep that going. And that's the most important thing, in my opinion, is to fund the journalism. Now, there's a lot of things you want to keep funding along the way, and there's a lot of other parts that are important too. And that's where, you know, a great sales team that's involved in your newsroom is really important. And you should be, you shouldn't blur lines, but you should definitely see them as a partner in the news business, because your sales team can help you really succeed. And I think Ken's in a really great spot. The AJC does have, and it has a unique financial situation where it's a little bit altruistic from the Cox Group, and that's really fortunate. And I think that's great. And they're not in a unique position, because I know a lot of major newspapers that do not make money, and they're supported by other avenues of business from their parent company. You'd be surprised at how many corporations have the slang term I'll use is side hustles to make sure they can fund their journalism. And most large newspapers are not profitable right now. Most large metro dailies, they're not. Some of your mid and small size papers are. A lot of your community papers are profitable. Because they have a completely different business model than a lot of us, but we're all on different business models. And I think that just really digging in and making sure that you're being a smart business as well as smart journalists is really important. I really like talking about the business of journalism, and I'm really invested in this in news succeeding. So I do a lot of research in this, but I think that it would be crazy for any journalist to believe that we're past the days of layoffs or reductions in the newsroom. I think that if you follow the news industry at all, you know that several newspapers have said they're not returning to an office after this. I think the Miami Herald was one of them. My former newsroom is currently in searching for a new space. And so I could see a world where there are major metro dailies that don't have a physical space. And while that sounds crazy and bizarre, and I think that everyone that wants to work in a newspaper has a little bit of nostalgia to them, and they love the print paper and they love working in the big ivory tower newsroom, but I think it's a very realistic thing. Another thing that I'm pretty open about is, you know, the print product is evolving and changing, and we've already dropped a day in Athens. We don't print on Mondays. I could see a world where we drop another day. There's no conversations around that happening right now, but I could see us dropping another day or two. And I could also see us leaning really heavy into our e-edition. I think that newspapers should really lean into their e-edition. When people find out those exist, they love them. And so leaning into that, telling people that's there, educating them on all of the different resources we have and all the different ways we have to communicate our journalism is so important. And I'm trying to get involved with more of the aging centers in town to show them how to use the e-edition for some of their residents, because I think that that's important, and it's a lot of lower overhead for us, and so that plays into the business model. But like I said, I love talking about the business of journalism, so I could do a whole other talk on that.
And I do want to go back to something that you were saying, Caitlyn, about how we've gone through 3, 4, 5 major news cycles within the past 6 months. And so amid all of that, what are skills that are more relevant now for young reporters to know and to work with than they were in years past?
I think one of the biggest things I have been impressed with younger journalists, and one of the things I will always look for when I'm hiring journalists, is someone who is willing to do whatever is needed to get the news reported. And I don't mean that in like an ethics way. I mean that in like, and a sports reporter is willing to go cover a protest. I mean that if you're a videographer by trade, you could put together a 300-word story to go with your video. I think that being nimble and being well-rounded is really important to me, and is something I have been very impressed with as newsrooms. As Ken was saying, the AJC kind of shifted beats, and I think that in some years there have been times when people have been asked to shift beats and they bristle it. They don't love it. They don't love that idea, and they were like, no, I've covered this for forever. I don't ever want to change that. And so being really flexible in how you can do that is really important. And yeah, that's my biggest thing, is flexibility, and knowing that at any given moment you could be the COVID reporter, and then the next week you are on protest coverage, and then the next week you're on election coverage, and then who knows what you're on the next week. And so being really adaptable and flexible in that way is really important to me. And again, I'm coming from a small newsroom perspective where where we have to be that way. And I think my last paper was a mid to larger size newsroom, and we didn't have to be quite as flexible, but still it was important when collaboration and flexibility were there.
Yeah, I would agree with what Caitlyn said wholeheartedly. I think the one other word I'd add is fast. You have to be
Yes.
fast
Yes.
today. And young people I think younger people are very well suited to that, because you're young, you've got energy, and you can do that. But in addition to being able to pivot quickly on different stories and different areas, because most newsrooms that you're going to be going into are smaller. I mean, there's still a lot of paper to fill. There's still a lot of website to fill. And so, when you see a story, being able to jump on it quickly and know how to execute quickly and accurately is really important. I think that even before the pandemic, there are still skills that I think are very, very important. I think increasingly now, having some experience with data journalism and understanding data and how you can turn data into good stories. One reason that that's important is that data-driven stories can allow you to punch above your weight in terms of your size. So, for example, one person who's got a hold of a data set that covers the entire state of Georgia and does some good crunching and analysis on it, can come up with one or several stories that have impact the entire state, not just Atlanta, not just Athens, not just wherever you are. So I do think data journalism is very important. I think facility with public records and knowing how to get them and ask for them and push for them is also really, really important. It depends on what kind of publication you end up working for, but the newspapers, traditional legacy newspapers, are still going to make their mark, I think, with depth. And depth comes from getting records that tell a deeper story, sourcing that tells a deeper story. So those things are important.
Yeah, I'd like to second Ken on the comfort level with public records requests is also something that I think journalists early in their career, if they can be good at that, that's such a great tool. I mean, it's just being comfortable sending those emails off and asking for things is just so advantageous.
And this is kind of a very similar question, but a different angle. A lot of young reporters are covering the same things protests, COVID-related coverage, racism in Greek life, what sorts of skills would you recommend that young journalists pick up to make them stand out from the rest of the crowd?
Well, I mean, in the end, if you really break down what we do to the sort of simplest things, right? There are two parts to it. There's gathering and reporting information, and then there's assembling it into a coherent and easy to read or digest story for your audience. So, so in my mind, those two broad sets of skills are still the most important for a young journalist to learn, right? You have to know how to report, thoroughly and accurately, and then you have to have an ability to synthesize that reporting into something that's cogent and coherent and clearly written. Um, you know, it's very true in the industry that you have still, you've got journalists who are much stronger reporters than they are writers, and you've got others who are much stronger writers than they are reporters. But your goal, I think, as a young journalist is you want to be the best at both of those, or as best as you can be at both of those.
Yeah, that's a tough question because I think some of the things that I think separate you in the way maybe you're also asking is, when there's this swarm of coverage around one topic, how does your story stand out or look different? I think that's something we all sort of battle with. And my perspective, we have to make sure our SEO is as good as it can be. We have to make sure our headline is as good as it can be. We have to make sure all of those bells and whistles are as absolutely as unique and different. We look at what the AJC is doing. We look at what, maybe Macon or the Columbus is doing and see how we can separate ourselves from that. And so I think that part of that also could be that you need to read what people around the state are doing and see if you're just repeating what they're doing in your own way, or if you're actually separating yourself. Because I think as journalists, I tell this to everyone, but I think as journalists, we all feel a little bit self-important and we all have egos. And so I think we all think that everything we write is the best thing it can be, but really taking a step back and saying, why is mine so much different than the AJC? Why would someone come to the Red and Black and not the AJC about this story? Is it because we have better SEO and we beat them in Google? That's great if you do. That's great. Is it because our headline was better? That's awesome. You've got to figure out where you can best the other markets. And that's challenging. It's what we all are dealing with every day. That's the name of the game at this point, is once you have the good journalism, how do you make sure that it gets to people in the way you want it to be? And that's the challenge.
And are there any words of advice for student reporters graduating into a recession?
Well, first of all, you should not be discouraged because, even as bad as, or as difficult an environment we're in, newsrooms are still hiring. They still have internship programs. We just restarted ours. We did take a little bit of a hiatus over the summer to kind of figure things out, but we're back at it, and most newsrooms, I believe, are at this point in terms of interns, and then of course there's still going to be turnover where there are positions open. So I don't think you should look at it as a hopeless task. I think the things I think I would advise is, first of all, play to your strengths. So the audience here, everybody is UGA, right? Am I right about that? Okay. All right. So UGA and Grady is a stellar credential to have, regardless. But it carries more weight in Atlanta and in Georgia and in the southern part of the country than it probably does in California or Washington or New York, because there are other schools out there that they know or whatever. So um, if when you're, graduating from Grady, if you sort of are, I think, targeting an area where the Grady reputation is known, where your professors and others might have contacts in some of the newsrooms where you might be applying, that's all going to be, helpful to you. And the other thing I would say is don't be afraid to start small. When you're young, um, you can do that because presumably, or I'm guessing you're not married, or you don't have as many responsibilities as you get, particularly financial, as you get older. So you're mobile, you can move around places, and and you get you can get great experience working as a one-man band in a smaller market for a smaller publication. um, one of the guys from the New York Times who won a Pulitzer Prize this year, I know from IRE, and he's I forget exactly what part of the country he was from, but his first job was working for a small newspaper in Indiana, and I happen to know. I mean, I was interested in knowing that because it was adjacent to the town that my grandfather was from in Indiana. Anyway, so it was a town of 10,000 people, and I think he might have been the only reporter in the newsroom, but he got to cover everything. He learned a heck of a lot. He went on to his next job and did very well, and then another job, and now he's at the New York Times, and he won a Pulitzer Prize. So I think, I don't know. I mean, he still may have been that successful if he'd started out, at the AJC, but I kind of think that he probably learned some reporting skills, some toughness and aggressiveness by being in a smaller newsroom.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I'm gonna echo Ken there, and obviously we both work in local newsrooms, and I think that, so this is going to be a little bit of some bias showing through here. Um, I graduated from Grady, so I'm very intimately aware of the success and sort of the avenues you have access to at that school. I mean, there are so many opportunities at that school. It's incredible. Don't be afraid to work at a local newspaper. Local legacy newspapers are awesome. I would not leave the local newspaper environment right now for pretty much anything, because I adore it. I love it. I think it's the greatest. I really do. That's not to say that, going to work at CNN or another major network or a major whatever Vox, whatever other media there is out there isn't another awesome opportunity. But don't be afraid of local news, because it's wonderful. There's so many challenges and there's so many things you learn,
Right.
and you get to cover so many fun things. I mean, even in, I worked in Lexington, Kentucky. I would have never in my life picked Lexington, Kentucky as where I would have lived for 4 years, but I got to cover March Madness. I got to cover the Kentucky Derby. I got to cover all kinds of really cool, fun things there. And it was it was wonderful. And I can't say enough good things about it. I will also say, don't be afraid to freelance. Do not be afraid to freelance at the end of your tenure as a student, and then in your summer, and when you're kind of searching for a job, reach out to all those connections and freelance for them. Not only that'll give you a little taste of who they are, what they operate like, and kind of how much they pay. That's a really good opportunity for you to network and get paid to do it and get some reps. So really don't be afraid to freelance if you have to, and look up how to invoice, look up how to negotiate freelance rates, because all of that is so important. I don't know if Grady emphasizes that more now. They did not when I was in school. And I think that could be a course in and of its own, is how to be a freelancer in 2020. But I think that that's another great opportunity for students right now. And network. I mean, you guys network all the time anyway, but obviously that's knowing people, unfortunately, is oftentimes how you will get your foot in the door somewhere. And, as journalists, we talk a lot. So it's an easy entry point, but network as much as you can. And this is advice that I know absolutely no student will listen to, and that is okay, but I'm going to say it anyway. Don't be afraid to say no to a job. Just because it's your first job offer, you don't have to say yes to it. If it doesn't feel right and you don't think you're going to be a good fit and you're going to learn, you can say no to a job. No one's going to listen to this because everyone's going to want the first job that comes coming at them. Don't be afraid to say no to a job, because there will be a job that is the perfect first job for you. I promise. You will get a job. I promise.
And any final thoughts before we open it up to questions?
About getting a job? Or
don't
anything.
Take one in March 2020. Yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's, all the things that you're learning about reporting, one of which is persistence and doggedness. That pays off in finding a job. If you can apply those same skills to making connections, following up with connections, and even after you've gotten your first job and moved on to your next job, staying in touch with people, if there's a place, we have many interns who, come through our newsroom, have over the years. There are only a few, though, who have taken the time to keep in touch and, occasionally reach back out every 6 months and say, hey, how you doing? Here's what I'm doing. Take a look at this. And believe me, when we have jobs come open, those people are the people we think about. So those connections and maintaining those connections are important.
And Caitlyn, any final thoughts?
No, I think I've talked myself out, which is kind of crazy to think. But no, we can open it up to questions.
If anyone has any questions, they can unmute themselves and ask, or put it in the chat if they feel more comfortable to do so. Give everyone a little time.
Hi, can I pop in? Is that okay, Savannah?
Of course.
Hi, I'm Amanda Bright. I'm on faculty at Grady, and I just loved all the things you said, because I probably told all those things to my capstone students in the last few weeks, so that's like always really great. And we do talk about freelancing and negotiating salaries in November. Be ready for that, Savannah. So that'll be good times. My question's a little bit more esoteric, and I love, Ken, what you said about data, because that's my passion, is understanding, contextual reporting and really getting them to dive deep and see stories inside of data sets. But I'm curious about character traits, which are things that we don't particularly teach. It's our hidden curriculum, right? And you mentioned, Caitlyn, flexibility, which, we try to teach a little bit of every platform, right? A little bit of all types of storytelling for that reason. But I'm wondering, when you are interviewing somebody, when you're getting to know them, when you're looking at their social media feeds and interacting with them, reading their cover letters, their portfolios, what character traits or disposition elements do you look for in a reporter that will make them more successful for serving the audience and for being a good fit in your newsrooms?
So I'll repeat something that I first heard, I think, from my son's baseball coach many years ago, which was coachability. So, you want, young people coming into a new place, you want them to demonstrate that they take direction well, that they are eager to learn, new things, that, they don't have to be necessarily, like outgoing necessarily. In fact, there are many, many, many great journalists who are really more introverts than they are extroverts. And so one thing I always tell young people is, if you feel like, you're not that person that, is going to be running to, chase after the politician with the microphone. Don't worry, there's still there's still probably a great place for you in a newsroom. But the other thing is, and I don't know if this is where this gets taught or learned, but um, you have to have a lot of integrity in this business. You've got to have a lot of, you have to be, we demand that people tell us the truth and are honest with us, and you have to be that kind of person too, to do this work, I think. And then you also have to work very hard. You have to be a hard worker.
Yeah. Yeah, I think integrity is a good one, Ken. I think that's a good one. And it's really hard to point to that, but that's definitely important. And I think grit, that's like kind of a lame word, but it falls in that same thing. I think you can tell when someone has some grit to them. I always I like to think I can identify that in younger reporters and young photojournalists, because I think that that's really important, and the hard working, I think that goes into the freelance. I think that if you're willing to freelance, you're telling me that you're going to work hard and you're going to go out of your way to do work. And that's I oftentimes lean on student freelancers whenever it comes time to hire, because I think that I have a soft spot in my heart for students who go out of their way to do that. And I think that I'm a very honest and transparent person in casual conversation. And I like when people are honest and transparent with boundaries. It's a very hard line to walk, but I think that you can tell when someone is being truthful and honest and open with you in a moment. But also, you have to maintain boundaries. You can't put everything out there in a job interview or in a professional setting. But I don't mind if someone tells me, hey, look, at 7:00, I usually quit checking my phone. That's sort of when my day ends. I don't mind if people are going to tell me that up front. I'd rather them tell me that up front. Don't be afraid to say, oh, you know what, I have a kid. That's going to come up a lot. So you should always be honest and open with the people that you're working with or potentially working with, because I think that makes it a lot easier for them to empathize with you, but it makes them realize sort of the human elements of you, and it might make you a better fit for a job in the end, depending on what you are so transparent about. Now, that's not to say that, if you do say that you quit working at 7 and I call you at 8, I won't be pissed the next day whenever you've missed a story, but I think that as long as that open line of communication is something that someone is comfortable with. It's really hard.
I would add, I'm just thinking about the question more. I think empathy is a really important trait in a journalist.
Yeah.
You're gonna be asking people to tell you their stories, and some of them are uplifting, but some of them are not. And if you really, I think you owe it to your subjects to really be able to, let them know that you understand, you're grateful for them to share their experience with you. And in my experience, empathetic reporters end up getting a lot better stories, because they're the people that they interview, their sources end up confiding more to them, telling them more, pointing them in other directions that are helpful. So it's that's a good quality to develop.
I'm gonna bounce off you, Ken, because I like that. I like where you went with that. I think humility, someone that's humble, it's kind of wrapped in the same empathy element, because working with sources, you have to be super humble in those moments, especially if it is a very sincere moment. I think that we know when we've struck gold with a story, but that doesn't mean that it's a golden moment in someone's life. And so if you're giddy over this story you're getting, and someone is telling you about a death in their family or a very tragic moment, you have to humble yourself in that moment and remember that the story is about them and not about your story. And I think that will apply. Something I've learned in my career too is it applies to internal relations too. I think that When you're a young journalist in a newsroom, you are going to walk into a newsroom with a very wide range of levels of veteranship and expertise. And at all moments, you should assume that someone in the newsroom has the best intent and knows something that you don't know, and you have an opportunity to learn from them. Because I think as a young journalist, it's very easy to walk into a newsroom and think, I'm fresh out of J school, I know everything, I am by the book, I am the walking textbook, we're ready to go. And you're going to look at someone who's been there for 25 years and is slow and can't turn on their computer that day, and you're going to think, why in the world are they here? And that is a very poor attitude to have. I think that every single person in this industry has benefit, and so I think that being humble enough to know that is really important.
Thank you both. Those were fantastic answers.
Do we have any other questions?
I'm always disappointed when no one asks about salaries. I'm always like, whenever I know students want to ask about salaries and they never do. And I'm like, I know y'all want to know how much money you're going to make. I'll give a little plug here too, that it kind of touches back on the idea of grant funded journalism. And I won't go into a huge twister of information here, but I think that that's another really awesome path for young journalists right now. Canada, do you guys have any Report for America reporters?
We just made our first Report for America application, and we're waiting to hear whether we're going to get funded for this next round.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you're applying for this cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So my last newsroom had 3, and it's a fantastic program. They do great work. You get to cover some really interesting things. It's a 2-year max option for you. So if you have to go somewhere that maybe isn't your dream city, it's 2 years and you're going to be fine. But it's a really cool program, and they do a good job making sure that you are paid fairly, and they make sure that you get placed where they believe you will succeed. And so I think that that's an opportunity that a lot of young journalists should look into, is being a Report for America reporter, because I think they get to do fantastic work. And it's probably appealing to young journalists, because a lot of those journalists go on to either get full-time jobs that end up being pretty hard-hitting beats, pretty heavy hitters in newsrooms, or they move on to big newsrooms. The first Report for America reporter that was actually in Lexington, and the first overall RFA reporter, as a dear friend of mine, and he's at the New York Times now, and he's 25. So there's some real opportunity there. We are also applying this round, Ken. So
yeah, great, good.
I hope we get more RFA reporters in the state of Georgia. I think Columbus and Macon. I think they share one. I think they're the only ones.
Is that right? Yeah. So. Yeah. No, I think it's a great program too. I first learned about them at the Houston IRE conference, which was 2 years ago, and I think they'd just done maybe 1 or 2 years of funding. I can't remember. When did they start?
So they would have started would have started, what year is it? It's 2020. We would have started, I think it was either 16 or 17.
Yeah. Okay.
That summer. It must have been 16 or 17.
Yeah. So I think it's from what I can tell, it's a great program. I mean, some of the, at that conference, I met some of the new Report for America reporters before they had started their assignments. And a couple of them that I talked to, I was a little concerned about, A, the remoteness of where they were going to be living, and B, that their editor might be 200 miles away. I remember one young woman who was going to be on an Indian reservation, and but the closest major town that she was, where her editor was going to be was, far away. And I do think in your, whatever job you get, you want to, it's partly about the experience, but it's also partly about the direction, mentoring, and editing that you're going to get. And it's important that you have that piece, and you feel sure that you're going to get that piece in, whatever your job, whether it's for a newsroom or with Report for America.
Right.
And any final questions? No.
Hey, I have a question.
Oh, go for it, Tyler.
Oh, there's Tyler.
Hi, thank you both for speaking to us. So you mentioned, being aggressive with sources and getting information. What advice do you have for balancing that and not burning a source later on?
Well, the ways that sources can get burned, right? I mean, they're not really, is if you break your word to them somehow. That's how they get burned. Is you say you're doing one thing, or you're quoting them one way, and then they open up the paper or whatever, and they are totally surprised because it's not at all what they were expecting. And that's just bad. That's just bad reporting, really, because you should never burn a source. You should never burn a source. So I think being clear with people. I mean, one thing that we do at the AJC in our investigative reporting, as we call it, the no surprise rule. Even sources for stories who would be better described as the target of the story because what they did was bad potentially. We will call them up before the story runs, and even if they refuse to talk to us, right? That after persistence, they just did not want to be quoted, did not want to talk to us. We still will pay them the courtesy and say, I understand you didn't want to talk to us, but this is what our story is going to say, before we publish it. Sometimes that can prompt them to then offer a comment, or maybe say, well, no, you got this wrong, or whatever. But people should not be, as much as possible, your sources should not be surprised by what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Ken's answer stand there because he obviously, being the investigations editor, I think that he's gonna be the expert here. But it's just being a human and knowing how to talk to people. And I think one thing when you're earlier in your career, it's super uncomfortable to sometimes tell a source, hey, I need this to be on the record, or to push them a little bit. And with more reps with that, is the more often you have sources, the better you'll get with those uncomfortable conversations. You're going to have a billion uncomfortable conversations if you are a journalist. It's going to be with sources, or it's going to be with readers, it's going to be with on the record, off the record. It's going to happen all the time. And so you're going to get more comfortable approaching people that are maybe not, you have different levels of sources. You have people that you only go to when you need them. You have people you kind of yik yak with all the time. You have people that come to you. And so I think some people, it's a little more uncomfortable to say, hey, this is me talking to you as a reporter. I need you to understand what's happening here. And so just kind of breaking through that awkwardness is something that's a challenge. But I think that as you develop your sources and develop your career, you'll get the hang of it.
And to anyone else, again. Okay, well, seeing as we don't have any more questions, I want to thank you both for joining us tonight and providing your words of wisdom on the state of the industry now. If any of our participants in the meeting have questions, can they email either of you or contact either of you with those questions?
Sure. I mean, just bearing in mind that days are busy and sometimes, might not be able to get back to you right away, and don't be, and if you don't hear back, try again. It often happens that I'll set aside something, saying, oh, I need to, respond to this later, and then get caught up in the next thing. And before I know it, I haven't. So, it doesn't hurt to gently remind again.
Yeah, I agree. And we just moved from Google email to Microsoft email today. So if I don't see your email, it's because Microsoft ate it, I'm convinced. So I am not fluent in Microsoft email whatsoever. But yeah, my email is very public. It's on the Banner-Herald website, easy to find.
Thank you both again for your time. And for everyone in the meeting, this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel to look back on. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome, Savannah. Great questions. It was good, really nice to